Hello and welcome. His sculptures and artistic pieces have helped to put Brazil on the contemporary arts map, and he's not averse to pushing boundaries to achieve striking results. This week on One on One, meet the internationally renowned Brazilian artist and filmmaker, Tunga. His was a classically elegant, cultured and educated family from Palmares in Brazil. Gerardo, his father, was a journalist, writer and poet, and his socialist activist mother, Leah, appreciated the arts, along with a large extended family that also included many artists. It was the kind of intellectual family quickly targeted by the military regime of Brazil in the 1960s, forcing them to flee to Chile for a few years. A fan of cutting-edge techniques, Tunga's work uses a variety of media and appears as sculptures, installations, drawing, poetry, film, and even naked actors. Since the 1990s, he's been exhibited widely across the world, particularly in Latin America and Europe. Tunga attracted attention in the USA from the mid-1990s, and to this day hasn't slowed down in trying to find a new way to reshape his unique and artistic story. Tunga, thank you so much for inviting me into your home. It's almost a museum in itself with all your work here.
Well, my pleasure.
Let's start, the name Tunga. First of all, give me your real full name, so to speak.
Well, my real full name is Antônio José Barros Carvalho e Melo Mourão.
Okay, good. I had to say Tunga.
Tunga, it came definitely before I was born. Before I was born, my brother used to call me Tunga without knowing what I was, a human being or a thing or something that he got his intuition that my name should be Tunga. And then he called myself Tunga.
So let's look at art as a concept then. I mean, it's always a tricky question, I guess, but I want you to define art to me, how you see it.
Well, art is a discipline for myself. I think art in terms of evocated the real life. In principle, the surrealists used to say that real life is absent. I do believe in that. So I think that art is a way to go through the real life. It's a territory we can go through real life. As religion is another, there are several different ways, but art is one of these ways. How do you regard when art becomes very commercial then? I mean, certainly in the West, it's become a way to sell, a way to hype, a way to create waves. There's almost a business around art, not just the expression of the art itself. Well, I think there are two different stages of the thing. One is to produce art, to think about poetry. The other is what poetry becomes. In different cultures, there are always one kind of self-expression, which is poetry. Let's call poetry not art, okay? And then is how to put this poetry, this manifestation out in the world. For instance, everybody dreams during the night. And everybody tells his dreams. There are different places where dream telling has different values from others. And in art as well, different cultures doing art have different values. Nowadays, art becomes kind of global. So there are certain values about doing art that became very fashionable and positive in different societies. So they have to trade that, they have to make that appear in different societies in a different way. They become valuable, and in different societies, this value grows a lot, grows a little, or that's the way. Now, it's interesting, I know you treat your life, your actual life story, as an art form as well. I'll be asking you about your family history and your background in a minute, but you also weave in fiction into your life as well. And how do you do that? Well, the first question we're supposed to answer is where I was born, for instance. Nobody knows where he was born. I think that nobody really remembers when he was born. So that's a storytelling. I mean, one can say that you was born that day in that place, and you do believe it. You do believe it from the version of your parents. You do believe it because you read in the paper or because there are rumors, but it's already a fiction, it's already a version. A version is a fiction because it's a different way to tell, you can tell in different ways. So for you, it was Palmares was where you were born, but also Rio. Oh, wow, yeah. I was born in Palmares. I mean, they told me I was born in Palmares, and I have this document. When I could read, I read it. Oh, well, it's a test that I was born in Palmares. But other people in my family attest to me, say to me that I was born in Rio. The fact is, I was a bit suspect about that information. I was born in Palmares, Pernambuco, which is north of Brazil, or I was born in Rio, which is in this tropical area. And I used to live with my mother and father, and they live in a big house with my aunt. It happens that there is a famous painting about a Brazilian painter called Guignard. He's a modernist artist. He painted the portrait of my mother and my aunt. And it's a very well-known picture now in Brazil. And in fact, they are twins, identical twins. Painting two twins, you just need one model, technically. And during my childhood, living with my mother close to my aunt, it had happened that the real mother and the representation of the mother was already a question.
Your mother was a social activist, wasn't she? She was quite involved in the community.
Yeah, she was.
How did she influence you in your character? What aspects of her character do you see reflected in yourself?
Well, she was an easygoing character, but to tell you the truth, I was living with my aunt and my mother. It's a bit confused because somehow it was my aunt that came and somehow it was my mother. So my aunt was an artist as well, a sculptor, and my mother a social activist. So this was already a mixture that was done.
Your father was a poet, but he was also quite politically active.
Oh yeah, he was a deputy, and he worked like a journalist, as a journalist.
So in the 1960s, when you had the hardline rule in Brazil, a lot of people were targeted, especially those in the creative field, which the military regime, I think, always had a problem with. So then he was forced into exile. You went to Chile.
Yeah, I went to Chile, and I went to Chile in that time, and I lived for 2 years and a half around, and I was 16, and it was a wonderful time because in exile my father was engaged in a university in Chile, which is the Católica, from architecture, and it was a very particular university which was founded by poets and architects, and they established that architecture has to come through the poetry, differently from mostly of the architecture which is done. And I lived very intensely this kind of poetical thing that we live in Chile in that moment.
Take me through that time you did have to flee, though, because it was a pretty difficult move out of Brazil. You had to literally pack your bags and leave because they were after your father. You were about 16 years old at the time. What do you recall of that and the tension?
Well, to go back that time, it was very intense and contradictory. At 16 years old, in my case, I was not able to really deal with the whole thing, to organize what was really happening. I mean, the danger and the conflict. And in a certain way, this period produced to me a will of study and try to understand things. So in that moment I start reading a lot of philosophy and psychoanalysis, things like that, to try to understand a bit what reality was about.
You had obviously these influences, artistic influences, from an early age. You said with your aunt, your father to some degree, traveling to Chile. When did you realize you wanted to pursue a life of art and artistic expression?
Well, early I wanted to do something, and having my father as a writer, poet, and was surrounded by books the whole time, I had to find another field. So I think that the visual thing was more structured for me, and it was more positive for me.
How did they react? I mean, because parents usually want to see how their children will make a living. It's not a clear one.
Well, it was quite natural being surrounded by artists and poets and thinkers, philosophers, it was quite natural and acceptable. Obviously, they're always concerned about how you're going to live, how you're going to be successful. It's a fear that all the families had, but it hadn't really.
It wasn't too much of a problem.
It wasn't too much, but in a certain way I thought on that, and I went to study to be trained as an architect, which was more kind of normal profession at that time. No one was expected in the 60s and 70s to make their living normally doing strange art, let's say like this.
Did architecture appeal to you, though? Because it's got its own expression.
Sure. So the experience of doing architecture, to being trained as an architect and working with different architects gave to me a lot of what is the complexity involved in building something which is not just for look, it's for being inside. And I think that this complexity came through my actual work as a sculptor or installator or whatever.
It's interesting because your perspective on life and how you regard things, you have a different view. You can see things that other people might not notice because of your artistic perception. How did that, as you were growing up and through your teens and going through schooling and stuff, how did you relate to other people? Did they connect with your artistic vision?
Well, in a certain way, that moment is the moment where you get a group of people, and you always get together with people that have the kind of same sensibility, and everybody knows that this time is a time where you're more protesting against things, and I mean, you want new things. So we have a group of poets, artists that work together, so there's not much difference. It makes difference during accepting that you're gonna go through life with this kind of vision. I mean, I think that this is a vision that normally people can have at 16, 15, 12.
Was it a good time for artists as you were growing up? Was it a time when people were allowed to express themselves, that people had an open mind, that you knew you could say and do the things you wanted to in Brazil?
Brazil, in that moment, had this huge heritage that is appearing very clear now, I think, around, which is the mixing of cultures being effective. And the structure of modernity came here, and it found out here, I think so, that really right territory where modernity could grow. I think that this moment in the 60s, they were cooking the things that today we're seeing very clearly, what is expression of art through Brazilian culture. The particularities that Brazilian culture can bring to this structure, which is the modern structure.
That's almost like a 50-year dish.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tunga, I have more questions for you. We're going to take a short break here. More one-on-one with Tunga when we return. Welcome back. You're watching One-on-One. We're speaking with award-winning Brazilian artist Tunga. Your artwork developed, obviously, as you got into your own expression, and your first show was in 1974. Take me through what happened and how you related to having to put it out there in the public.
Wow. This was a watercolor show, indeed. I mean, it was an investigation I was doing. The title of the show was the Museum of Childhood Masturbation. So as it suggests the name, I was already interested in the question of the desire, and I was doing kind of very, very teeny watercolors, and the coincidence is that in a certain way, from 74 to now, the things I'm doing now are still connected to that show, and I think that the basis, the early works from an artist several times get the quintessence of what he's going to be developing during his lifetime. And I can see that it was already, I mean, the intuitions were there. And
it's a controversial subject. I mean, it's at least a very risque subject, in some places.
Yeah, I was interested in desire and the manifestation of desire, and it was a bit provocative as a first show, as a title for a first show, but I wanted with this provocation just to bring people straight to one certain vision of what I was doing, so that sexuality was implied, even if there were any explicit reference to sexuality. I was interested in that, as I'm still.
How do you regard the limits of art? That is, should there be a limitation on what can be expressed through art? Should there be sensitivity to certain issues? Should there be taboo issues for art?
I don't think there must be any limitation, but if you need to say something, you have to say it for being understood in a certain way. So you have to choose the one. If you want to provocate, you can provocate, but it's you have to measure the risks of provocation, not just in front of yourself, but also in front of your ideas.
Brazil is such a fantastically diverse place. It's amazing seeing the mix of people. How much do you think that diversity of population, the mix of ethnicities, if you like, helps people in Brazil be more diverse in their artistic tastes? Is it a place where expression is easier?
What happened in Brazil when the modernity that appears in Brazil in the last century, in the early 20s and last century, expressed a bit what is happening now in the global situation. I mean, this kind of mixture, which is happening in the international scene of globalization in terms of culture, we've been experiencing that for 100 years. So the first idea of modernism in Brazil was about anthropophagy and digesting other cultures. Today's question, it is about this, how something produced here can be understood in India or in Bangkok or in other places. So this kind of situation was modeled during more than 100 years in Brazil, and that's the actuality of Brazilian contemporary art.
You travel a lot as well as an artist, and you're in demand around the world. How do you find the art scene is changing globally? Is the globalization of the world visible in the art world? Are people more open-minded to works from outside?
Well, I do believe, yes. Recently I was doing a class, I was invited in Hanoi, and for the students. And I was showing some of the works, and I chose a bit by chance, and I showed the piece with blooded serpents live, the capillar twins, which are two twin girls that have the same hair that comes from one and goes to the others, and strange pieces like more performance pieces to the students. And the reaction was beautiful because mostly of them were very excited to see that because they seemed to understand what it was about. And the main reaction was we didn't know that we could do that because they were supposed to be trained for painting and sculpture. And that's what more close the way they think, in fact, in relationship to their religiosity and their traditions. So this opening field that contemporary art represents around can be very positive in this sense, to liberate the signs, the senses, and to have a space where the senses can appear.
Which of your pieces, which artwork that you have put together are you closest to? Which do you relate most closely to or enjoy the most, your favorite piece, so to speak?
Well, I try to work in a sense that one piece which is new and produced in use, try to radiate and influence through the other pieces I've done before. So the sensation is like to build a big concerto where you're writing lines and then putting together. So you're not necessarily conceiving the whole thing together, you're conceiving a quartet and a solo, and you're writing for an instrument, and then you put it together. Each new word, each new work I do seems to be part of this work, so affected the other work. So the answer is the actual works I'm developing.
So actually it's like everything combined is a symphony. You're constantly adding new instruments and new pieces, is that?
That's the way, yeah. I think that, well, we try to put together ourselves, that's the way.
Who are your mentors? Who influenced you through life? Who did you look up to?
Oh, that's extensive, yeah, that's really extensive. And well, I tried to read a lot of poems because I was trained and studied like that. I was surrounded by that, so most of Occidental poetry and a lot of psychoanalysis, a lot of philosophy, and well, and the art, the Occidental art as well. It's kind of, I'm interested, concerned about everything. So.
What do you see as your defining moments? I know you were the first contemporary artist to exhibit at the Louvre Pyramid in France. But that presumably was one of the highlights, being able to do that, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, and I was not probably the first. This is a program dealing with the new direction of the museum that they have contemporary art in the Louvre. I was called to do some intervention in the pyramids, which is defied because there's a place where everybody arrives to the Louvre. And this for me was a bit like I should confirmate some things that I have in mind. What I have in mind is that one can speak with signs that concern human being differently from one precise culture to another. There are kind of very ancestral elements that can be used as signs, as part of your language that can be translated, understood by different people from different cultures.
So truly universal.
Mankind, let's say.
When you start a new piece, How do you approach it then? Are you looking back to your past and your history, or are you looking forward?
No, normally I don't look back. I mean, it's the back that comes after. I mean, to recognize myself in new things I'm doing. It's a very slow process. I mean, each work takes like 5 years to appear normally. And I start working small things, can be just a line, a writing thing, or part of a musician. Anything can be the start. And sometimes it's a fiction that have to be converted into reality. Sometimes it's a reality that have to be converted into a fiction.
Is it difficult as an artist with a very strong sense of expression to collaborate with other artists? Is it a difficult proposition to say, let's work on something together?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I have the habitude of working together with a lot of different people. People like Lia Rodriguez, which is a choreographer, people like Eric Rocha, who's a filmmaker, or musicians, or Simon Lane, who's a poet. I like very much this intensity of thinking about one problem and try to give different points of view. So I work a lot with performance as well. Collaborating with another people, being artists or whatever, it's trying to bring together more intense and different points of view from one thing.
Your work is exhibited around the world. Is there anywhere, though, you would like to see your work? Maybe an unusual place or somewhere special you'd like to say, that's my work up there?
Oh, well, yeah, there are a lot of caverns, a lot of deserts, a lot of hiding places that I would like to have works.
Somewhere unique?
Yeah, not necessarily in the circuit. I mean, I answered this question more thinking about the energy of the place or the particularity of the place, which is already something that creates meaning to the piece which is going to be there.
So there's some synergy.
So even the place is part of a piece. So then you can think about places like a special cavern or a special place in the desert or a water fountain.
Tunga, if you were to be remembered a certain way, to leave a legacy, what would you like it to be?
Well, in this precise moment, a piece of crystal, because I'm dealing with crystals in several pieces.
But if someone was to say years down the road, this is the man, Tunga, this is what he's about, what would you like them to be saying about you?
Just remembering this name and trying to look what this name shows. I mean, some of the pieces I've been trying to do.
Tunga, thank you very much for your time. Great talking
to you. My pleasure. Thank you.